Okay guys, so I am recording this screencast video because Schoolwise is gone wonky again, and that could happen throughout throughout the month or throughout the few weeks that we're off. So I'm going to record this. I'm going to send a link to this video on Fishjog. I'm going to create a page that says 6th year school closure work, and if for any reason Schoolwise isn't working, you can go straight to Fishjog and have a look. I do apologise in advance. You are going to hear kids, you are going to hear ducks, you're going to hear dogs, but we'll do our best. So what we're going to look at today is urban settlement and planning issues. Now, I'm going to record this whole slideshow. This would normally take us about a week. So you have your notes to go with this, and then when you finish this slideshow, I want you to plan out an essay. So this will take you a week, whether you do it all in one go or you split it over our classes, that's fine too. I will try and have a live face-to-face session with you on Thursday just to check in with you and see how you're getting on, if Schoolwise is working. If not, we will have to reassess. So let's get started. We're looking at urban settlement and planning issues. Okay, so here are some of the learning objectives for this chapter. So we're going to look at the different land use zones within modern cities. We're going to look at theories of urban land use. We're going to look at changes in land use and planning issues. We're going to look at land use values in cities and how this can lead to social stratification. And we're going to look at recent expansion of cities and the pressure that causes on the surrounding rural landscape. We've actually already done this when we looked at urban problems in Brazil. Okay, I'm just going to skip that one. So we're going to start off with these theories of urban land use. Now, these are complicated enough, or certainly look complicated, but actually when you sit down and work them out and think about them, they're not that bad. So you have three main urban land use theories that we're going to look at. The first one is the concentric zone theory by Burgess, which came out in 1925. We're going to look at the sector theory by Hoyt in 1939. And we're going to look at the multiple nuclei theory by Harris and Ullman in 1945. So you can see that all three of these urban land use theories are quite old, and so they don't perfectly fit with our cities today, but you might take elements of them. So why do geographers study models? Well, geographers use models to help them understand reality. Land use models tell us where we might expect to find different land uses, like high quality housing or industry, and they also help us to understand the pattern of growth of a city. Now, I want you to look at that circle there. Basically, that's saying that each of those rings has a different function, okay, has a different land use. The middle one is the CBD, and then there's various different zones as you go out from the CBD. But if you look at that picture, you can actually see that if you were to refer to Dublin and put this model to Dublin, you're going to see that there's a problem. So I want you to imagine if you just drew a line down here, okay, that would be Dublin here. I want you to think what would be over to the left, what would be over to the east. So why does this model not fit Dublin? And the reason for that is, well, we've got a coastline here. Okay, so straight away you can see that this model might help us to understand the growth of cities. But if you've got a city like Dublin, which lots of cities are on the coastline, you straight away have a problem. So we have a problem in terms of our cities growing out on a semicircle rather than a full circle. So Burgess' concentric model, okay, with the word concentric, if you think of it, it's to do with circles. So Burgess was based his studies on Chicago, and he claimed that most towns and cities grow outwards from an old centre and equally in all directions. We've seen there that this isn't the case with Dublin. So if we just click here, okay, so there's the CBD. That's the original settlement, and the city has grown kind of outwards in circles from that. The inner city area, so just outside the CBD, and the CBD is the central business district for anyone who doesn't know. So outside there, then you have this zone of transition, or the twilight zone. And within that zone, then you have light manufacturing and you have low quality residential. So if you think of kind of inner city flats or old kind of inner city housing, up around the Docklands, that kind of area, it's not going to be very fancy. Whereas if you move out of the city, say heading towards Bridge, you can see the medium quality residential, and then as you go out further, the high quality. Don't worry if you're not too familiar with these places that I'm talking about. I will give you examples later. Okay, so if I can, I'm just going to show you a picture of New York City. Okay, and there's a nice image. This is the picture that I want you to have a look at. So if you can see here, okay, this is the CBD of New York, of Manhattan. What do you notice about it? You can see that the buildings are very, very high here. And then they start to get lower as you move out, okay? And then if you look here, you can actually see that there's more high-rise buildings there. So what's happened here is this is the oldest part of New York. This is where people first settled. And so it was the first development, and it's grown outwards from that. So you can see the height of the buildings here shows that actually land is worth a lot of money here. Whereas in this middle area, it's not as expensive. And then you have down here, you actually have a second kind of CBD has developed. But you can see it much clearer here, I suppose. You can see that you've got the low quality housing here, and then you have the CBD there. All right. So back to our PowerPoint. And yeah, so basically you have to familiarize yourself with these 5 zones. The CBD, light manufacturing, low quality residential housing, medium quality residential housing, and high quality. And you can see that these areas are normally in the inner city, and these areas are as you move out to the suburbs. So Hoyt's theory basically suggests that settlement grows in an outward pattern. This was supposed to start here, okay, so that you had your CBD in the middle and it starts to spread out, and eventually it was spread out into the countryside. I don't know why that's not working for me, and that's going to annoy me for the rest of this. Let me see. No, okay. Okay, so here's just a little diagram. So we know that the inner circle here is the CBD, or Central Business District. Outside that inner circle, so think of Guinness's in Dublin, okay, so you have the inner city, and then you've got Guinness's, you've light manufacturing, or you've got industry, you've the port there in Dublin as well, okay. Around then those industries, you have low quality housing, okay, so you've got working class housing, and it makes sense. The poor people back in the 18 and 1900s, so yeah, the 18 and 1900s, who worked in these industries wouldn't have had cars, wouldn't have had great public transport. So they needed to live close to the factories. So the small kind of cramped little terrace houses, and then eventually obviously inner city flats and that, they would have been concentrated here near the industry, which is where most of these people would have worked. And then as you move out into the suburbs, you've got kind of medium quality housing. And then as you move out further, you've got high quality again. Okay, so this is all within the city though, okay, and the suburbs. We're not talking about out in Meath or Kildare or anything like that. Okay, so Hoyt was slightly different, and he, look at the shape of his model, okay, so he still has a CBD in the middle, but you can see that unlike Burgess, Hoyt's actually moves out in kind of long vertical lines. The development is moving out linear rather than in circles. Okay, there is some of it obviously spreading out in circles, but you can see all these wedges have started to appear. And he basically introduced his model after the development of public transport. So he claimed that Landuse models developed in sectors, and that's why we call it a sector model, or these wedges, okay, along major transport routes. And you can see again, you've got your CBD in the middle. You've got light manufacturing out along one route. Okay, and the same here. You've got low quality residential housing alongside that. You still have your low quality residential housing kind of centered around the CBD. And then it's out here in a wedge between these two, light manufacturing. And then as you move out, you've got your high quality housing here, and you've medium kind of surrounding there. So again, I'm just going to show you a little diagram of this. Where am I? And if you look at the road network of Ireland and the M50 images, you can see clearly here you've got Dublin with the port, and you can see how all of these arteries are kind of going out of Dublin, all these major roads, which are linked then by the M50. Okay, or it's probably a better diagram here, okay? And along these routeways, you can see that development has continued to grow outside. So this is Dublin here, but you have North Dublin here. You have the M2 bringing you out towards Ashburn, so it's all built up there. Your M3, you've got Blanche here, moving out to Dunshaughlin. M4, you've got kind of Liffey Valley here, you're moving out through Lucan, Maynooth, Leixlip. The N7, you're moving out towards Naas. Okay, so you can see how development in Hoyt's sector model is actually very relative to Dublin. Okay, and if you were to look at a Google map of Dublin, which I think we can probably do, Google map of Dublin. Let's just see. Okay, and I'm going to, oh yeah, well actually it would have been better with an OS map. But again, you can see the development has come out. And if you were to look at an OS map, you'd see the grey shaded area is very concentrated out these roads. We know the grey shaded area on an OS map is a built up area. Okay, so back to our slides. And we are going to press play. Okay, so I want you to look at these two models. So what have we learned? Well, which one is the concentric model? Okay, if you think of concentric circles, it's obviously the top one. Who came up with that model? It was Burgess. What labels are missing from the key? Want to have a guess there? So the blue area, it's the light industry, okay? And then list the similarities and the differences between the model. So when you're writing this essay, I want you to introduce the model, explain briefly what it is, say, you know, kind of how it helps us to understand urban development. But then I also want you to look at the problems. And again, you can use Dublin as your example there. So the first common thing is that the CBD is in the centre. The second common thing is that industry kind of comes out, or radiates would be a nice word to use, out from the CBD. Okay, in Hoyt's sector model, obviously it's continuing out along a public transport network or routeway. Okay, that there is some, I suppose, growth of the city in, I suppose it's radiating out on both of them, but that it's a much more even growth in the concentric model, whereas Hoyt's is very much concentrated along these routeways. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you're talking about. The last one that we didn't actually look at there, but I'm going to just go back to the first slide. Okay, now the notes, I think I've given you, there's a lot more detail on this in your book as well. But this is just a brief kind of overview, and if you've any problems, we will chat through them. So we spoke about this fella here. So you can see Harris and Ullman, they came out with this multiple nuclei theory. And again, this one kind of would match quite well with what I showed you in New York. Okay, that you kind of have multiple growth centres, but also in Dublin as well. So again, the CBD doesn't change. The CBD is, just, sorry, one second. Okay, so you have the CBD there, as I said, it doesn't change, all right? So it's kind of the old part of the city, or the central business district. If you think about it, it's where the main banks are, sometimes the main university. If you think of Dublin, you're talking about in and around kind of Trinity College, the central bank, that kind of area, okay? And then you've got your wholesale, your light manufacturing again, okay? So if you're relating this to Dublin, you're talking about the Dublin port kind of area. Okay, which would have been the industry. You've also got Guinness is there close to the city centre, to the CBD. Then you've got your lower class residential. So look, that's around again. You've got your middle class residential. So this is quite accurate for Dublin. If you think that's Trinity and the central bank, then over here you've got the port. You've got the small little low class cottages around there. Now that's been redeveloped recently. Look at that. Then you've got your middle class housing. So if I don't know if you're familiar with Dublin, but if you think of the North Circular Road over here and the South Circular Road over here, that's the kind of area you're talking about. And then as you move out towards kind of your Balls Bridge, your Black Rock, those kind of places. But then you have these little extra bits appearing, which we haven't seen before. And this is a sub-business district. Okay, so it's, you know, the CBD is now full, so they're creating a sub-business district. You saw that in kind of Midtown in New York. And then you have these residential suburbs, look, all of a sudden have popped up. So this is your Dunshaughlin, your Maynooth, your Leixlip, these kind of places, your Ashburns. So they're close, which would suggest that there's some kind of a major routeway out here, okay, for this to just pop up here. And then you also have heavy manufacturing. So this would be the likes of your plant and cement, kind of near Drogheda or anywhere kind of around Dublin that you'd have heavy industry. And then you have industrial suburbs. So this would be the like of an industrial estate. So if you think of City West over in on the N7, they kind of created a little industry suburb and then housing developed around that. So rather than just one CBD with circles around it, or one CBD with lines coming out, which would be obviously routeways, you now have this multiple nuclei. So anyone who does science knows what a nucleus is, okay, that you have these little pods popping up all over the place, and they will actually have their own development around it. So they'll have their own kind of concentric land use and development around it. That's it. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. Now, goes into way more detail, but I suppose the main thing I want you to do in an essay is I want you to, explain briefly what it is, and then I want you to, I suppose, give examples. So I've given you loads of Dublin examples there. Some of you aren't familiar with Dublin, but it's an easy one to mention. And then obviously mention the issues with that. So if they're, obviously the concentric circle one is too simplistic. It doesn't take into account the geographical features of the landscape, okay? Heights is again quite simplistic. It doesn't kind of take into account that other growth centres develop and emerge. And then you've got the multiple nuclei. That's, I suppose, the most relevant to us today. But again, look at the date. It's 1945. So there's going to be some issues there as well. It is dated. Okay, so we've done all this. I am going to just go down here. Sorry, I'm talking to myself now. Okay. So why does land use vary within an urban area? Okay, so that's the next thing that we're going to look at. It's kind of self-explanatory, really, isn't it? You have different zones within cities. So you've got a commercial zone, you've got a residential zone, you've got an industrial zone, and you've got recreational. So we're starting to link in here with our maps, okay? And when we look at our aerial photographs and our maps, a lot of what we're doing here is going to be, it's going to be worded in that kind of a question. So look at this aerial photograph of Dunshaughlin and identify some of the zones, or the urban land uses within the area. So for those of you who had me at Junior Cert, you might remember rice pots. This is basically rice pots. Okay, so they've simplified it here down to 4, but rice pots is recreational, religious, there's a third one, residential. So that's your R's. If you want to write these down, you can pause this video at any time if you want to grab a pen. So recreational, religious, or residential, that's your R. I is industrial. C, commercial. E, educational or ecclesiastical. Ecclesiastical is just a posh word for religious. P was a port function. O is open space, which would link into recreational there as well. So, rice pots is just designed to help you kind of think in your essay. T is transport or tourism. And then S would be services. So all towns have services. So that's your rice pots. Just to quickly link in with that, but we will do that again when we're doing maps. Okay, so your land values in cities. This is a very weird, complicated thing, but it's nice that it's actually a Dublin one, okay? So you have the peak land here, the value intersection. This is all just a posh way of saying that the most expensive land is in the CBD, and the further out you get, the value decreases. Unless, of course, you come across a new nuclei, as Harris and Ullman said, in which case you might have expensive housing around that, depending on what it is. Now, Blanche, Liffey Valley, and Tala are 3 shopping centres on the outskirts of Dublin that are already in kind of lower class housing areas. But if you look at Dundrum, for example, Dundrum and the putting in Dundrum has increased the value of houses there. Okay, so it just depends. It's not as simple as, oh yeah, if you build something new, it's going to increase the value of the area. But there is a slight effect. Okay, so your bid rent This is going to be on your keywords, so just learn it. Your bid rent is just the price someone is willing to pay for land. So the bid rent in the CBD, if I wanted to buy a building and rent it out to a shop, I'm going to pay a lot more money to buy a building on Grafton Street than I am on Dunshaughlin Street, Main Street, okay? And then obviously my rent that I can charge is going to be substantially more. One of the closed shops, Pamela Scott, recently closed down during the second lockdown, but only closed down all of their stores in Dublin. And they've kept all their online shopping, but they've also kept their shops in the likes of, I think there's one in Mullingar, there's one in Navan. Why is that? Well, it's pretty obvious. Imagine how much rent they have to pay in Blanche, imagine how much rent they have to pay in Navan. Only down the road from each other, but a big variation in their bid rent, okay? So the CBD is obviously most desirable and therefore most expensive. You've got the shops. The PLVI is the most valuable site, so that's in and around the CBD. You've got offices then at the edge of the CBD. So if you think of Dublin, kind of all the glass buildings over in the IFSC, so they're on the edge of the CBD, but they're not in it themselves. Industry you've got on the outskirts of the city. So if you think of Guinness's there, okay, or the Jameson in Smithfield, those kind of areas. They are now very much in the city of Dublin, but at the time they would have been on the outskirts. And then you've got suburbs with shopping centres, business parks and industrial estates. Think of your Intels and companies like that are very much on the outskirts of Dublin. In fact, Intel's actually in Kildare. Okay, so this is a land use graph. Unfortunately, I don't know why it's not working, but if you imagine that this is the price of the value, so the CBD, you're going to have very high here. And the further you move out, the lower the prices go. And you might come across little peaks, so you might come across a more expensive area. But as in general, the line or the curve goes down this way. Now, one thing I will say to you is if you go back and you look at that New York picture that I showed you, let me see. There you can very, very clearly see the bid rent and as it goes down. So what's happening here on this slide, oh, not that one, sorry. So you can actually see that in skyscrapers. If you look at the city line, the cityscape and the skyline, you can actually see the land use variation and obviously then the price of the land values as well. Okay, so why does land use vary? Now, this is quite important and you could easily write an essay on this, but I'm only going to give you these few points. So I really will need you to look into that chapter that I gave you. Okay, so land values, they have a major influence on land use patterns. Okay, so there's a kind of a snobbery sometimes attached to land values. The more expensive something is, the more people want to be there. If you look at Monaco, for example, I was watching a program with the most expensive houses in the world recently, and your man bought a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Monaco with like a sliver of a sea view. It wasn't even a nice apartment. 20 million he paid for it, just so he could say he owned somewhere in Monaco. Okay, so it's a tiny little place that the land value is very high. CBD kind of works the same. Space, you saw there Manhattan. Manhattan's an island. So there's a limited amount of space. That's therefore going to make it a lot more expensive. If you just go across the Hudson over to New Jersey, the land values are much, much lower. And you're literally 2 minutes on a train into Manhattan. So that's space. Age, obviously the older part of a city can sometimes be more beautiful and so in more in demand as well. Accessibility. So obviously we've seen in Dublin certain places that are on the Lewis link have kind of increased their land value because commuters are using it. So anywhere that has good train networks, rail networks in London, you add on something like £10,000 for every minute you lose £10,000 for every minute you are away from a subway station or a tube station. So if you're 5 minutes from a tube station, your house is worth 50 grand less than if you were right beside it. If you're 10 minutes away, it's 100 grand less. So it really shows you how accessibility is important. Wealth of the inhabitants, that goes without saying. The wealthier the area, the more affluent the people that live there. Okay, and planning policies. So that's kind of becoming an increasing focus for a lot of urban planners, urban developers, to try and stop the outward sprawl of development and try and get us to go up. Downtown LA has something like 20 million people, or LA has 20 million people living in the city. No, that's not right. I think it's maybe 5 million in downtown. Anyway, it's multiple times what we have in Dublin. I think it's 5, in and around 5. But downtown LA is actually the same size as Dublin City because they have skyscrapers. So whereas they've gone up, we just sprawl out and out and out. And it's creating, obviously, huge problems when it comes to public transport, road networks, all that kind of thing. Okay, here, that's the skyline image that I was kind of explaining to you. So again, this is very much like Burgess' concentric circle theory. So you have the CBD in the middle, and then look, you've got your inner city low quality housing, then you've kind of got your semi. So if you think about it, you've got your terrace housing, your semi-Ds, and then your individual housing in the suburbs. Okay. So what are the characteristics of the central business district? This is very simple. What do you expect to find in a CBD? Study the following slide and write down the characteristics of the CBD. So if you pause there, I want you to write down what you see. Okay. So basically you can see high buildings. What does that tell you? It tells you that there's a higher land value there. The fact that there's skyscrapers would suggest that it's a wealthy country. Okay. It's definitely the CBD because you can see how high the buildings are versus the rest, or the rest of the inner city. It's most likely going to have the major banks, the major institutions. Okay, you might have City Hall, that kind of thing there. So administrative centre, financial centre, all that kind of stuff. Okay, you're going to have old buildings because it's the oldest part of a city. So you'll often find the most beautiful little old churches, or if the city has medieval kind of history, you're going to find those little kind of quirky buildings. You're probably going to find a lot of Georgian buildings there as well, because they would have really kind of enhanced that area and developed that area further. And you're going to see, and this is called the Flatiron Building in New York. This is actually, it's hard to see there, but it's actually a triangle. So you've got a road down here and you've a road down here, and the building is shaped like a triangle, which is like an old flat iron. That's where it gets its name from. That is just demonstrating that they are using every single available inch of space to build a building and that's quite an old building. So that will tell you that, you know, space has been in demand in New York for a long time in Manhattan. So your CBD characteristics: concentration of shops and offices, high price of land, buildings are tall with multiple uses, you've often the zone with the oldest buildings, concentration of traffic and pedestrians, very little residential land use, and you've got nodal point for transport routes. So it's a nodal point. What that just means is it's like the center point with all the transport routes coming out of it. If you remember at junior cert, you would have looked at Navan as a nodal point, or kind of a major route focus is another word for it. Okay, and the CBD is constantly changing. I'm not going to do this with you. The inner city, then describe the typical inner city scenes. Why is it known as the zone of transition? Well, it's known as the zone of transition because it basically goes from the CBD out kind of to residential. So you're going from business to residential. You have lots of kind of little independent shops, kind of greengrocers and corner stores and that kind of thing. You have terrace houses, sometimes quite old and pretty and very desirable now, but at the time you would have had large families living in these. They would have been quite poor. They would have worked in the local industry, like the ports, those kind of things. So the inner city includes a variety of land uses. Originally it used to be used as an area of 19th century terrace housing for factory workers. Some of that has been replaced by flats and high rises. Okay, if you think of any city in Europe, you see these. So which of the following land uses are you likely to find in the city? I don't think this is working either. Let me see. No, region. Okay. So here you can see a little kind of aerial map. You've got a key, so you've got your houses here, you've tiny little gardens, more like little courtyards, and you've then roads in between them. This actually you wouldn't, well, yeah, they would be little laneways, I suppose. And then you've got factories in blue. So that's very typical of kind of the 19th, 20th century development in cities, especially, I suppose, 19th century and in industrial cities. So, expansion of urban areas. We know this all too well as we live in the commuter belt of Dublin. So cities expand and change, and their functions and needs change too. Planning issues relate to kind of rezoning. So you have areas of Dublin in particular, and when we look at urban problems in Dublin, you'll see this. You have huge areas where once the industry pulled out, once the kind of the ports and that, obviously the port hasn't closed, but certainly the amount of workers there, all those houses kind of fell into disrepair, and people lost their jobs, so they didn't have money. So then there's a lot of crime in the area. And because people don't have money, little local shops and that would close down. So then you've got nothing to do. So you've got drug use and those kind of problems. You've lots of social problems associated with these kind of lower class housing areas around kind of the old industrial parts of the cities that have since kind of become redundant. Lots of industry moved out to the suburbs where they had more space to grow and land was cheaper. And so these poor people who didn't have cars, public transport wasn't great, they had nowhere to go and nothing to do. And so what you see now in recent years is that they're taking these areas and they're rezoning them. If you think of the IFSC in Dublin, the Irish Financial Services Centre, again, anyone who had made junior cert would have looked at this, but you should have as well with your other teachers. But we'll go into it in more detail too. Approximately 84% of people in Europe live in urban areas. Okay, and finally then the characteristics of the suburbs. So as the expansion of cities grows out into the countryside, you have the development of suburbs. I don't know if you can see this, but it's the growing towns and cities. You've got urban sprawl, which is the uncontrollable growth of the city. I'm just going to change that font because it's very hard to see. Maybe that might be easier. Let's see. Yeah, so you've got growing towns and cities spread outwards. Urban sprawl is the uncontrollable growth of urban areas. Rural land at the edges of edges of cities is rezoned as residential. You've got a donut-shaped city. Okay, so you've got the kind of that blank CBD in terms of residential, and then you've got all of this development on the way out. And then you've got massive environmental and cultural issues which are associated. Now, this is an essay. So describe how the growth of cities in a developed country or some of the negative effects of the growth of cities in developing countries, or urban problems associated with the growth of cities in developed countries. We've already looked at developing in terms of the sample essay I gave you on Kolkata, and then obviously what we've learned for Rio and Sao Paulo. But you could be specifically asked to talk about a developed country, in which case we're going to look at Paris and we're going to look at Dublin. So any of the information that you got from Paris, we looked at the decentralization of Paris and that kind of thing. So you can look at problems and then solutions. Okay, so your suburbs then, nearly there, stick with me. The suburbs grew most rapidly in the UK with the growth of the rail network. This allowed people easier access to the city centre for work and recreation. The suburbs contain a mixture of housing which tends to be more spacious and modern than the housing found in the inner city. We can divide the suburbs into inner and outer suburbs. The inner obviously is poorer, the outer is more wealthy. The inner suburbs in the interwar housing. So this was kind of between First World War and Second World War. You have this kind of housing developed, particularly in England. And then post-war, you had lots of kind of council estates and kind of high-rises built in the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s. And then today, you kind of have more modern housing estates. They're really moving away from the high-rise as it causes a lot of social problems. So why do you think people moved from the suburbs from the inner city to the suburbs? This is known as suburbanization. And there's plenty for you to digest there, which you can give examples of when you are writing your essays. Finally, then, housing in the suburbs. You need to know this. I know as simple as it sounds, but you need to know the difference between terrace, which is more than two houses stuck together, semi-Ds, which is two houses stuck together, and detached or individual houses, which you can see there. But you can also see in the suburbs how, remember that tiny little patch of garden that I showed you in the inner city? Now look at what they're getting. Okay, and nice green spaces and windy roads, and you're not really overlooked by your neighbors and all that kind of stuff as well. Okay, so I want you to do this. I want you to pause this here, and I want you to look at, does each housing characteristic belong to a traditional inner city area or modern suburb area? I am going to actually ask you to write down, oh no, this isn't working, hang on. it working? Okay, doesn't matter. Sorry, skip that. Okay, so match the photos to the zones. So again, you know here, high rise is going to be the CBD. Okay, high rise residential, it's going to probably be the inner city, and then you have here is the suburbs. And the same again, I'll let you do that at your own pace, but pause and have a look. Okay, and this I do want you to do. So actually, if you go back here and have a look at the traditional inner city area and modern suburbs, you can fill this in using this. Okay, and finally, that's a word search with all the keywords on it, but if you want to do that, you can. So finally then, your key ideas. Land use models tell us where we might expect to find different land uses and helps to explain the pattern of growth of a city. Burgess noted urban areas grow outwards from all centre of the concentric model. Hoyt said growth occurred along transport routes, and Harris and Ullman said that there was multiple nuclei. Several factors influence land use patterns, especially land values. In the CBD, there are shops, offices, and entertainment. In the centre or inner city, there is 19th century terrace housing and industry warehousing and high-rise flats. And in the suburbs, there's more modern, high-class new housing, new industrial estates, signs and business parks, and shopping. The end. Now, before you go, I am going to put up some questions for you. So just wait there for 2 seconds. Okay, so guys, if you go to Schoolwise is acting up again at the minute. So if you go to Fish Jog, I am going to put all of the work on Fish Jog. I will link it to Schoolwise, and we will have our Teams meetings through Schoolwise. But just if Schoolwise is down for whatever reason, you can work away on Fish Jog. Please, if you go into Schoolwise and it's not working or it's frozen, go to Fish Jog. I will do what I did last year, and I'll have it week by week. So if you go to Leave Insert, you can see here. Oh, hang on, actually, I need to just publish this. So just bear with me 1 second. Sorry. If you go to Fish Jog and you go to the Leave Insert page, you will see school closure 6 there. There is the email that I sent you last week. Just to kind of give you a bit of encouragement. But I said there, so hello, I hope all your friends and family are safe and well. So here we are again. I will be using Fish Jog to upload work as Schoolwise is acting up. Whenever it's down, please come to this page to access the work. So if you go down here, you can see that the week beginning 11th of January, attached is a video link to the slideshow, which is what you're watching now. So you've obviously got this and all the rest. I have 2 files down here, which are all the urban questions from the exam papers. And I will be uploading work here as well. So there are the instructions. If you got this link, you're on this already, but that's where all the work will be. And we will have a Teams meeting on Thursday, all going well, at our normal class time, the first class that we have on Thursday, which if I just double check it, it is the beginning of period 3. Okay, so the beginning of period 3, so at 10:15, 10:15 on Friday, I beg your pardon, on Friday, when we would have our normal double. So on Friday at 10:15, I will be talking to you then. All right, thanks a million, guys. Bye.